So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Paul Kohlhaas, CEO and co-founder of Molecule. My journey into this space is quite atypical. So I'm not as James said, I'm not a scientist by training, but I spent a lot of time in online collaborative biohacking communities as a teenager. And these communities were really, I think, pioneering new ways of open collaboration. And I witnessed those ways of open source collaboration again in the blockchain space and the software space. And I think a lot of what we're trying to do is create a replication of a much more open and scientific and collaborative space. So why are we here today? Why do we actually want to accelerate science? I'm just going to ask very openly. Failure of what? Okay. Transparency in what? Yeah, great. Yes. I think we're all here for a burning desire to change, and I think to solve humanity's biggest challenges and our biggest problems. But what our biggest problems are is, I think, always a very unique perspective on being human. It's really, I think, what influences our personal lives the most, or our collective lives as people. So the actual why do we want to accelerate science, and for whom do we want to accelerate it? For whom do we want to make it more open? I think many of us are here to cure diseases. There are so many diseases that are still uncured today. Many tropical diseases, for example, that affect hundreds of millions of people across the world, and that yet we still fundamentally lack the incentive and collaboration frameworks to actually accelerate science around them. Malaria, for example, is one of them. We want to live longer. So I think one of the most prolific communities in the DeSci space has become VitaDAO, focused on aging and longevity research, with this fundamental desire of how can we alter our biology to live longer, healthier, and happier lives. We want to understand the universe. We want to reverse climate change. There are even, I think some of you are building DAOs or collaboration platforms to go to space. We want to create new forms of intelligence. And what unites all of this is really this fundamental desire to move forward. And as some of you rightfully said, I think we're massively today lacking imagination, not what to research, but how to really research it and how to make it more transparent, more open, and collaborative. So a quick recap for anyone that doesn't know the DeSci movement, but I'm sure many of you do. The DeSci movement is really trying to build new infrastructure, communication, and I think more so also a cultural layer that empowers scientists with ownership and financial technology. And this is really a trend that has become very apparent across the crypto space. It's really about empowering individuals, empowering self-sovereignty. I personally love this idea of making science permissionless. It shouldn't matter whether you're an MD, PhD at Harvard or a doctor in Nairobi. You should have the same access to accelerate your science. To make scientific outputs self-sovereign and unstoppable. So I think, as we know, there's so much scientific work that gets shelved, that gets deprioritized, or also that never makes it to market because certain market forces don't want to accelerate a specific cure. And then fundamentally, I think, in the same sense that open source software and the massive collaboration that enabled, we need to make science much more accessible, participatory, and transparent. Science is really hard. I think, as many of you would agree. And Web3 is also really, really hard. I first came into the crypto, or back then it was still Bitcoin, the Bitcoin space in 2014. And it's incredibly confusing what is going on. It takes years, I think, to understand the culture of that community, how it operates. But I think in a very similar way, it takes years to understand academia. And so DeSci is really ultra hard, if you think about it. And yeah, I always really like this meme. One does not simply decentralize drug development. That's something that we've learned at Molecule. Not the hard way, but we've had to learn it repeatedly over the years. I think something that the Web3 space really excels at is having a lot of imagination and kind of creating a solution space where anything seems possible. And it's that same space that we need to bring into scientific research. So maybe going back a bit, how did I personally get here and how did Molecule come into being? It's really it's been a 5-year journey of continuous experimentation. If you ever want to dig way back into the Wayback Machine, there's an article called Liquid IP NFTs and Bonding Curves, which I published in August 2018. This was after kind of the rise of CryptoKitties. Some of you heard of CryptoKitties. And I'm sure you've heard me say this phrase, but what if instead of attaching pictures of cats to NFTs, we actually attached a composition of matter pattern, or the fundamental description in IP around a novel molecular structure or about novel scientific research. With this idea, we then went on and we launched a first project called Molecule Catalyst, which funded psychedelic research at the University of Toronto. So a very small psilocybin trial with a researcher called Rotem Petranker. I think it was one of the only researchers as well that we could kind of find at the time that was crazy enough to do something on chain. Back then still using DeSci and our own custom developed smart contracts. This was even before Uniswap. So maybe just to put things into perspective. And I think we were trying to raise 200,000 or 150,000 for this clinical trial. And we managed to raise 5,500. So that was very humbling. And we began really thinking about where, like, I'm sure many of you have seen Venn diagrams. And a Venn diagram is really about finding good product market fit. And we realized the intersection of people in the world that are interested in funding psychedelic research and that know about DeSci as a cryptocurrency and are interested in science at this moment in time was still very, very tiny. Actually, I don't know if Alexander Lange from our, one of our investors is here. He's going to give a talk tomorrow. But he is one of the people that participated in this online crowdfunding in late 2019. So we learned a lot of that. One of the main things that we learned was it's going to be really hard to catalyze individuals to fund just an individual research project initially. If you just go out to a crowd and you get that crowd to become the owner of a research project, it's actually very difficult to accelerate it. So we went out and we started looking for more and more research projects. And then we found a really compelling one with the University of Copenhagen. Maybe some of you were at ARDD, the Aging and Drug Development Conference in Copenhagen last week. My co-founder, Tyler, actually worked together with this researcher in a lab. But we asked ourselves, hey, it's going to be, again, really difficult to catalyze individuals around the risk also that is associated with a single research project. And together with a few other folks, we then initiated VitaDAO as a first way of financing this research project and curating and developing a community around it. And then essentially began funding more and more research projects. I think to date, over 7 different individual labs and universities have been funded through VitaDAO. And so this is almost like a year by year by year. Building things takes many years, especially at this very difficult intersection. And then we launched BioXYZ to essentially help others replicate the design patterns that we saw around building DeSci native DAOs. I'm really excited that today so many of our first BioXYZ cohort are here. They're already very actively funding research projects across the world, which is amazing to see. So what has emerged from this is an entire decentralized science landscape. I want to give a big shout out here to the Ultra Rare Bio team and Jocelyn Pearl for continuously curating this ecosystem map. And I actually think there's still a whole backlog. At some point they couldn't fit more projects on this, but there's a whole backlog of projects that are actually not listed here. And the space is continuously expanding. If you go on to DeSci Global, for example, you'll see there's meetups almost happening on a weekly basis in a different city across the world, which is so inspiring to see. Where are we today? So I think since 2021, we've seen a massive community growth in DeSci, and also interest from leading figureheads in Web3, such as Juan Benet, the founder of Protocol Labs, Vitalik Buterin, And many leading thinkers in Web3 saying like, hey, this is one of the coolest use cases that we've seen for crypto because it's actually making a real impact and it's solving a huge problem today. We've seen over 10 different bio-DAOs launched, in total with a cumulative market cap of, I think, 75 million. There's really serious investor interest, despite kind of the ongoing bear market in crypto. There are over 1,000 different research projects that at least we know of that have been reviewed across this ecosystem that's emerging today. And I think there's really some best-in-class research that is entering these DAOs. So really serious research institutes, universities across the globe, considering to entertain this new model. So I think the total research funding via bio-DAOs today is around 8 million that has gone directly into on-chain research. We can count around 50,000 community members in DeSci DAOs. And while these are just kind of financial metrics, I think there are interesting metrics for the ecosystem. The cumulative market cap of all the bio-DAOs is around 75 million. And this is despite kind of the downturn that we've seen in biotech, the downturn that we've seen in crypto. But now, how do we get to 100 million in research funded and 100,000 scientists working in these organizations and really kind of a much larger market size for the space that we're developing? Like, what is the lever that we can pull on and that we can begin focusing on as a community that is really going to tenfold the impact that the space can have? So the hardest problem, in my view, really lie ahead of us. We have to bridge Web3. Bridging Web3 into science presents, I think, a very large cultural divide. Scientific progress and breakthroughs can take years. Crypto tends to say when moon. So, and these are fundamentally like philosophies that are quite at odds. So there's a lot of education and a cultural shift that needs to happen for us to bring this together. I think to merge the culture of science with Web3, science has to become much more direct. And with direct, I kind of mean like direct to consumer. Like figuring out how a specific, relating really to the communities that are forming here and relating to how a specific scientific innovation can have an impact in the world. Become more mimetic. I think many of the DeSci DAOs that we've seen have begun taking to this. It's also about making science more fun. And as Tyler loves to say, it's all about having fun. And then finally, I wanted to put initially here more financial, but more sustainable and more commercially orientated. At least, I think, if we want this broad range participation. And to merge the culture of Web3 with science, Web3 has to become much more usable. I think many of the DeSci organizations that we interoperate with today operate across a very wide stack of Snapshot, MetaMask, Discord, and that entire, I think, user experience for scientists really needs to still become much better. Web3 has to become more long-term thinking. Quick wins, like quick profits, just doesn't really work well in science. And I think that's something that really needs to be thought through, especially in the underlying tokenomic designs that various actors in the space are developing. And then this interaction, again, I think more direct to consumer, is like how can Web3 folks, or essentially just the broader population, I think actually categorizing the crypto community as one kind of amalgam is the wrong thing to do. It's more like, I think Web3 really presents a new way of onboarding, how patients, for example, can directly get involved. But then we need to build those intersections. And I think the most important thing is really to begin thinking about flywheels. So we have to enable flywheels that really empower Web3, citizen science, and direct community participation. At least that's where one of the biggest areas that I see DAOs being really successful at. So this is one of the OG Vita DAO sustainability loops. I think many of you have probably seen this before. It's essentially this basic principle that the DAO kind of vets and funds different research projects. That generates IP, that IP can be monetized, and then proceeds flow back to the DAO, which can be reinvested into funding further research. And I think the biggest question mark that I have, like thinking through this, is really this IP generated and monetized. And it reminds me, and so these are some of the research projects that VDAO has funded to date with an enormous success, really, really incredible researchers. But what is actually happening with that research? And so flywheels are, I think, incredibly powerful tools that have been developed across, this actually, I think, from Da Vinci, one of Da Vinci's early flywheel drawings. But for me, I think simplifications are great, but I think as a community, we need to start really digging into the details of how science is actually being accelerated through these organizations, for example. So it's like this fund research, monetize research, profit, sustainability. It reminds me, like this oversimplification reminds me a little bit of like this meme from Cartman that some of you may be familiar with. And I think oversimplifications are great, but as a community, that set our aspirations very high, and it allowed us to already achieve a lot. But I think we really need to start digging in, digging into the weeds here. So I think the reality for DeSci today is a bit more complicated in the sense of, at least for example, if you look at biotech or drug development, we're really part of a very long, very complex cycle. And I think need to begin thinking much more on how do we actually translate research to patients, to industry. And I think DAOs actually hold a key in achieving that. So this is a typical innovation and drug development cycle today. Different research projects emerge. And this all today happens within the boundaries of one firm or one organization. And I think DeSci is managing to really break that up and accelerate that through much more open collaboration and interconnectivity. So I think we're achieving to build the first pillars across this valley of death, but I think we really need to stay focused on what it will take to traverse the entire valley. So I think we need to focus much more on the ideal product and DAO market fit, where DeSci can accelerate translation. And DAOs and DeSci platforms together present really powerful tools to coordinate communities to collaborate, to perform tasks, to review data, and to develop assets directly with community feedback loops and distribution channels. And this can massively, I think, accelerate research across the valley of death. I'll give one example of this, which is HairDAO. So HairDAO, for example, recently funded a research asset directly with a researcher called Rolf Paus. And this was also based on community demand and selection. So the community said, hey, this is going to be a really exciting research project. We would outright buy this if this was available. The DAO then produces the asset and, for example, can sell early access to members. Community members can begin testing the asset, and I'm just keeping this very general, and submit data in the form of a decentralized trial or just through a patient portal. HairDAO developed a patient portal to do this. And the DAO can improve the asset based on that data and monetize the asset. Can I have 3 more minutes? Cool. And so at Molecule, we're really beginning to really focus on how do we get these flywheels going on an asset level to really help the DAOs and scientists accelerate science to patients, to industries, and to communities. And the same flywheel could be applied in a synthetic biology use case, or yeah, there's many applications for this. So as many of you know, Molecule really today makes IP fundable and ownable on chain. And our next goal is really that we're building collaborative environments for something that we call IPTs. You'll hear, I think, a presentation from Benji later about that. And I think also, if you want to dig into the legal, from Jesse, how IPTs can actually help translate assets at a much faster rate. So in June this year, we launched the first kind of fractionalization of one of VDAO's core assets. And so we call them IPTs, very easy, IP tokens. And they really create early liquidity and price discovery for IP. Now, what can you do with liquidity and price discovery? You can create micro incentive systems around an individual asset or around an individual research project. So where I think DAOs first emerged and kind of blew up with these big amalgams that started funding a lot, you have a large group of scientific reviewers, I think the next development will be really to kind of build microcosms around individual research projects. And this can even be applied outside of DAOs. These IP tokens can be exchanged for work, for funding, or for contributions. For example, instead of paying the reviewers of a DAO in the DAO's native token to do reviews, why not actually also incentivize them on an asset basis, where they can be paid in individual ownership in an individual research project? So IPTs for us really enable open source collaboration without losing any commercial viability. I'm going to skip this just for time. And we increasingly think that this can be one core flywheel that kind of creates these microeconomies within communities, with the goal being to quickly distribute work that has to be done around progressing an asset, kill a research project. I think so much research kept going on instead of actually just early on someone having the incentive to say actually it's not going to work. Actually, a majority of the costs in the whole biotech clinical development process come from assets making it far too far into the pipeline. Because if someone owns 100% of the IP, they always have an incentive to only share positive data and never negative data. And so we actually hope that these mechanisms can fundamentally surface negative data at a much quicker rate and either kill or accelerate research. Maybe to wrap it up, we're building towards a world, I think, where scientists, instead of spending 80% of their time fundraising, spend 20% of their time raising funds and 80% doing science. Where patient communities can directly fund, govern, and access cures from DAOs. Where scientists are fairly paid and incentivized for their work, permissionlessly. I want to thank you for being here today and for dedicating your lives to relentlessly building towards an open scientific future. And over the next 2 days, tomorrow we have Funding the Commons joining in for this space as well. I think that's going to be an amazing, create an amazing collaborative environment. One of the core important things in Web3 is really this open collaboration. And look for the flywheels that will accelerate research and that will accelerate DeSci tenfold. And have fun.